Hello, my name is David Adès. I'm a poet based in Sydney and the host of this monthly poetry reading series called Poets Corner, in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world will see a sharing and a closeness of spirit. Each month, I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them around a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is David Stavanger, who will read poems and talk on the theme of fragments, fragmentation, the poetry of the incomplete, absence, presence, and the intersection of poetry and capitalism as a lived experience. But first, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from my home in Beecroft in Sydney. David is recording from Port Kembla in New South Wales. Before we begin, I would like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders, past, present, and emerging, of the Wallamita people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and the Wodi Wodi clan of the Dharawal nation, the traditional custodians of the land from which David is recording, and to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land, which has never been ceded or given up. David Stavanger is a poet, producer, and lapsed psychologist, although I don't know that you ever lapse being a psychologist once you are one. Living on Wodi Wodi Dharawal land, he is the co-editor of Solid Air, Australian and New Zealand Spoken Word, University of Queensland Press 2019, Admissions, Voices Within Mental Health, Upswell Publishing 2022, and is the author of The Special, published by University of Queensland Press, which received the 2015 Wesley Michel Wright and 2014 Thomas Shapcott Awards, and Case Notes, which won the 2021 Victorian Premier's Prize for Poetry. His new collection, most of which our reading today is going to focus on, is The Drop-Off, Upswell Publishing 2025. David works as an artistic director at Red Room Poetry, where he produces Poetry Month, which we are right in the middle of at the moment, and the Mad Poetry Project, among other things. Hi, David, and welcome to Poets Corner.
Hi, what an amazing introduction. Love the thoroughness of your acknowledgement of country. And yes, here on Wodi Wodi Dharawal land, absolutely good to be with you. And I love that it's Poets Corner, David on David.
Yes.
You know, feels like the right pocket to be in.
Well, I wanted to get stuck into your theme because there's quite a lot to unpack, I think. I thought I'd break it up and deal with it in fragments, if you like. The idea of wholeness, which appears in ancient philosophy and religion and disciplines like psychology and even physics, permeates our thinking. Do you think we have been sold a pup, that this idea is illusory, that our lives are nothing but fragmentation?
Wow, I'm glad we've eased into this conversation. Yeah, what do I think about that? I think that there is an obsession, maybe not so much with being whole, but being complete. And I think that at times, particularly from maybe a Western lens, and the way we measure kind of completeness, which I kind of see is slightly different from being whole. I feel like there's the different fragments make up our whole, but I also feel like there's certain fragments that increasingly sit outside the idea of being complete to some sort of like societal cultural norm, particularly in so-called Australia or Western cultural setting. And I think that's maybe an interesting place as a poet to spend some time outside the whole and the fragments that don't quite fit together or don't. Yeah, I think that's my kind of thoughts on that.
So we're all puzzle pieces.
Yeah, maybe not that sort of concrete, but I think that I think the poetry that kind of interests me to write and bring it back to that, I suppose, is into the fragments that are hard to articulate, or you know, sometimes for me, poems aren't always about what you put in; they're about what you omit and the pressures that bear down on the room of a poem. And I feel like that as a person, that's also what it's like to walk around a lot of the time. There's what's that can be observed or known, or the idea of us being whole or complete, and there's always sort of fragmentary things going on beyond the immediate that nobody can see. And that's where I think poetry offers a vessel, an avenue for me to kind of write about those things.
Mm. I mean, poetry, to me anyway, is the art of truncation, and therefore in itself it's necessarily incomplete. So the genre itself is, I think, the embodiment of fragmentation. When you refer to the poetry of the incomplete, do you mean this as well as referring to incompleteness as the subject of your poetry?
Yeah, I think, look, when I wrote down these themes for you, they were pretty loose. Because I was like, give me some themes. I'm like, okay, sure. I mean, I
With them
think,
now.
yeah, that's totally fine. I think, yeah, the idea of when a poem is complete or finished has always kind of intrigued me. And often when I'm reading a poem, and I've heard other, poets talk about this, reading a poem down the track, I'll notice something and I might read a slightly different live version. And the idea that a poem is never complete and or somehow always evolving or responding to the moment in which you're sort of like revisiting it. There's that aspect of it. I kind of like, Lydia Davis is a writer I really love. And the idea of whether her collections of short stories, short prose, microfiction, or poetry, the need to name things, the need for work to be absolute. I mean, I feel like this collection probably sits in a place where some of it maybe is like poetic reportage, and some pieces don't quite maybe make it into a space where are they a poem or not? That kind of interests me. But she also wrote about the writing as fragments as form. That a fragment in of itself is a form, and at what point are you no longer in a phase of construction, or maybe it's both at the same time. I kind of find a lot of freedom in that idea to break out the idea of what a poem is and when it's finished.
Yeah, there's room to play. And there's an argument that the poem is never really finished until the poet dies, because the poem is subject to whatever changes the poet might make, and the poet very often does make changes. There's multiple iterations of some poems around the place. So it's a living thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, a poem is a living thing. It's interesting thing about poets dying in terms of what then happens to the work. I'm definitely not someone who has any really interest in legacy, work as legacy, or like what's my legacy of the work beyond me not being here. I'm more interested in, yeah, how does the work live now, in this time it was written, and what it was documenting then, and then what happens to it beyond that. Um, that's a beautiful thing about it, isn't it? It's just giving it out, and it takes its own sort of like journey with listeners and readers. And you to a degree as a poet become, I don't know, not just removed, but to some degree less relevant to the text over time, I think. Um, which I love.
Mm. What else underlies your thinking behind fragments and fragmentation and the poetry of the incomplete?
Well, I'm somebody who has a lot of memory issues for a number of reasons. So I'm an unreliable narrator of my own life, and can have a lot of issues with remembering things, or even remembering things as I document them. So I've written poems in certain stages, going through certain experiences where I've been making short notes, and then I've come back to them and questioned whether these notes were mine. And I think there's something quite fragmentary around my experience of memory and the idea of writing in first person as truth that I have quite a fragmentary relationship with. And I kind of like sitting in the idea of poetry as a place when you write in first person is somewhere between truth telling and being an unreliable narrator. And I think that relationship between, memory and reliability is one that being able to sort of write short notes that I come back to and then reshape. Not just for my writing, just to try and as a place of kind of recall into different periods that I've experienced.
Well, memory is malleable, isn't it? Every time you visit a memory, you change it. So, in a sense, all of our lives are fictions.
Yeah, I suppose to a degree that's true. I mean, the thing is like, um, I also like the idea of returning to notes that I've written, or fragments is like an email fragment. A headline from an email comes through, a fragment of speech in a, like, particularly in sort of corporate settings or and corporate speak, fragments of corporate speak that kind of grab my attention. I like to sort of keep those, and I think they're actually the heart of a lot of my poems. They kind of build out from there. So I think the fragments that I kind of capture or collect are kind of at the heart of a lot of the pieces I write. It's very rare for me these days to just have a poem kind of visit me. Some poets talk about a poem coming in a full draft, and that happens sometimes. But also dream fragments. Fragments from dreams are another thing that I like to sort of note down and then say, well, how do I then set them in this kind of waking space now?
We can never be fully present in a way, and we can't be fully present in each other's lives. So in the context of relationships, and in particular, say, family, kinship relationships, the dichotomy of absence, presence is always at play. Is that what you're referring to in that aspect of your theme?
It relates more to this book, The Drop-Off, which, it isn't just about this, but one of the central kind of tenets I wanted to explore was the space of co-custody as a parent, and the mathematics of that, as well as the kind of strange ephemeral point when you drop a child off literally and then are no longer sort of like on shift or under sort of like government agency considered the primary care at that point. The kind of mathematics of switching that on and off, and the absence, that kind of strange absence, which is one where you're still very much a parent, but the child is absent physically from the space in which you live together, and then they're back, both for them and for you as a parent, and the absence and distance between whoever that co-custody experience is with. I just felt like it's a particular type of absence, which really came home to me during the COVID lockdowns, when that started to extend out and have other factors about, it had to be prioritized over that sort of like usual kind of parental absence in those sort of settings. And yeah, it kind of amplified it all. And I felt like, my son was getting to an age where I was like, I've experienced this book for nearly 14 years. I kind of want to document that type of absence in a way that is from a place of being present in it, and present in my own memory and contributions to, creating that absence in the first place, through to trying to maintain that in a healthy way over a stretch of time.
Yeah, but even if it wasn't a sort of co-parenting situation, you would be oscillating in and out of absence and presence with him, with your son anyway. And that's just
absolutely, yeah. That's the nature of parenting. But I feel like there is a particular structure, specific structure, ordained structure, built into things like consent orders and things like this that structure absence in a very specific way. There's less spontaneity to it. There's more loaded into that absence. And I also felt like the male or the father's relationship with absence is often in media and film portrayed as a very angry, bitter, a sense of a lack of justice. There's a lot of those kind of narratives, and I read around a little bit, and I was like, there's not a lot of I didn't feel there was a lot of male identifying poets writing about this where they try to create a little distance and include themselves to observe how they've dealt with that absence, as opposed to just writing something kind of, I don't know, cathartic or kind of loaded with those sort of emotions I just talked about.
So you're trying to delve into the potential positive aspects of that absence.
I don't think it's that kind of binary. I think nobody chooses that kind of absence in their lives, and there's always a certain grief and there's always a certain strangeness to it. So it was more the strangeness of it that really struck me. I remember my son saying to me once, so Dad, you're my father 43% of the time. And I was really struck by that language. And technically that was correct at that time. Yeah, and the lack of agency and absence a child has around it all is another thing that really struck me, that they don't get to define the way that absence is shaped. So yeah, there's positives that come out of it. I mean, it was a really good time, and a lot of ways to be in lockdown just with my son and just be a parent and not be really producing and not really be writing and really connecting with them around things like film and walking the dog on the beach. And a lot of that is through the collection too. There's a lot of joy and love and I don't know, a sense of connection and parent-child kind of almost collaboration. Like we wrote a collaborative piece together in that time as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things weaving through that particular absence.
It's more an exploration than, looking at it from the perspective of someone who perhaps wanted to be more present.
Yeah, I mean, there are poems in there that definitely speak to the need to be more present or speak to very specific absences that I don't know if I regret. That's not quite the word, but I wanted to sort of be real about as much as I can. But, language offers safety and distance too. And it also offers the opportunity to go beyond the direct personal experience to invite others in to that experience in a more universal way.
Yeah, and beyond immediacy to a more reflective space as well. And then finally, you talk about the intersection of poetry and capitalism as a lived experience. That's obviously very personal to your lived experience. Can you explain what you mean by that aspect of your theme and how you think it manifests in your poetics?
Wow, this is what I gave you. I'm so sorry.
And I'm running with it.
I love it. I think that's a lived experience for a lot of people. I think that's particular to me. And my particular experience with it is multifaceted, I suppose, as someone who's intersected at times with the mental health system, even the very phrasing, of people as consumers in that setting. A lot of us in that community have mixed feelings about that. That language and that positioning is really interesting. That we're consuming a product, even when we're in a place of distress or a particular experience which we're not managing. I think also as somebody who has very much been a kind of DIY freelance kind of artist, but also with another hat on, not that I'm wearing any hats right now, producing and working in different orgs that then intersect with the way the arts, loosely termed, relies on and is built around a lot of corporate reliance, corporate language. There's a poem in there called Recline, which is very much about the idea of VIP seating at arts events, but then it goes out from that into something much wider, or just going to Specsavers and just seeing the phrase corporate eye care. I was offered, do you additionally want corporate eye care? And just the absolute bizarre foreign coldness of this thing. And it's like, why not poke a stick at this, but also signs that kind of, late stage capitalism is sort of like reaching its peak absurd moment. So I think there's quite a few poets increasingly writing about that, but also it has a big impact on our lives and our sense of intimacy and our sense of connection and our sense of what language is. And I kind of want to reclaim that, but also really, yeah, mess and play with those kind of settings because they're ridiculous.
Mm. We've sort of mentioned the different strands of your themes. Taken as a whole, how do all these different elements of your theme intertwine and inform your poetry, do you think? They're just all pervasive?
Yeah, look, I think I don't think you can be a parent, a poet, a human being, without feeling a sense of fragmentation, a sense of, am I complete in relation to a capitalist, culture that is always looking out and defining yourself on sort of external measurements in terms of materialism. I think that absence is increasingly, I mean, like when you see the UK have like a minister for loneliness, in the last 5 years, when you see that loneliness is like a leading cause of towards health issues, when we have such a broken mental health system, when we have so many families that are kind of fragmented, trying to make their way through all of this in very isolated ways, I feel like there are so many forms of absence at play that it's become sort of, I don't know, it's very foregrounded at the moment. The things that are missing, the things that we can't quite hold.
Mm. Now you're going to read poems mostly today from your latest book, The Drop Off.
Mm-hmm.
My copy of which has somehow managed to disappear between Sydney and Adelaide when I was in Adelaide recently. Now, I normally have a lot of questions for poets about the poems they read on this podcast, but I'm going to try and restrain myself a bit today because you have quite a few poems to get through. So I'm just going to invite you, after we discuss each poem and before we get on to the next one, to say anything else you might want to say about the poem that the discussion didn't bring up. And let's get into it.
By the way, that's a long list of poems. Just off the top of my head, we don't have to read.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. I'll start by reading. Yeah, it's the second poem from The Drop Off. I've been thinking about your birth lately. Maybe I'll just read it, and then if we want to talk about it, how's that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been thinking about your birth lately, striving to recall details of how this started, the gasp of you under fluorescent light. Dreamt up midwives and revolving shifts, witnessing labor stretch night's thin fray. And the transitions, canned laughter to small talk, the switch between active to tableau of rest, dilation of rooms and contraction of sheets. I can't remember what your face looked like under the medic's watchful eyes, whether you smelt of the hot milk of beginnings. Did I bring a change of shirt for the absence of euphoria, the presence of blood? Possibly a nurse was discussing the weather. Beyond the birthing suite, the sun had surely risen. It's impossible to say if I was in attendance, no drugs in me, anesthetized in other ways. When you were conceived, I didn't want to live, courting the formation of a darker star. I still study your sonogram daily. This post-natal amnesia a sentence. I crave the crown of fine hair, the physicality of child, to hold a living thing knowing it's as much mine as another's, the warm rubber of umbilical cord, thawed calamari tube cut in two for takeaway. The placenta is the body's only disposable organ, though other vital parts of us are expelled after birth. I think we put yours in the freezer to deter predators and reassure other parents. History likes to record firsts. The first time I held you close, I caught fire, earth-drawn boy, diving reflex engaged to free fall. Breaching silence, you knew my taste in music. Storage boxes foraged for clues, trying to retrieve your arrival, I emerge with connective tissue. In that nursery of strange wet babies, considering flight from eternity's wing, monitoring breath's escape, units of dependency measured in the phrases of a lullaby. Sometimes I read your certificate as an unofficial record of life. I have the DNA, know the formal date, still fret when you're late. It's hard to say what kind of parents we will become. There's no way to inoculate against this future heartbreak.
It is such a great poem to introduce your theme, David, I think. So many aspects of your theme are in this poem. Absence and presence. In the absence of euphoria, the presence of blood. It is impossible to say if I was in attendance. No drugs in me anaesthetized in other ways. The fragmentation of memory, loss or incomplete memories, or of a part of yourself in a new life. Trying to somehow convey this in a poem that is necessarily a tiny part of the whole. And the transitions and switches mentioned in the poem, which also speak to fragmentation. Can you speak to these themes as they appear in this poem?
This is probably one of the more immediately personal poems in the collection. This is a poem that I think most directly goes to the heart of a grief I have around my own absence around my son's beginnings and early years. It's the one I probably did the most drafts of, because the poem is actually trying to document elements of what I think I remember and elements I can't recall at a time when I was acutely unwell when we became pregnant with my son, and then when my son was born. So, and I was saying to Saul, my son, one day, "Oh, I've been thinking about your birth lately." It was just a phrase, a fragment of our conversation, and it struck me. I was like, wow. I was looking at it. I have a little photo of a sonogram during the pregnancy near my writing desk, and I was like, I want to think about it. I want to think about into what I can't recall. I want to think about into that absence, and I want to try and document that as a form of, honoring that I was there, a form of grief, and also to kind of like to a love song I wish I could have written at the time.
It's quite confessional. And you've said it's one of the ones that you had to draft and draft and redraft and draft. I mean, it strikes me as being one of those poems that are difficult. Not just the actual writing of it, but fixing in words for everyone to see what seems to be your initial reluctance almost at bringing a child into the world. The sense that you didn't really want to be present even in your own life, and perhaps weren't fully until perhaps the shock, almost like a kind of resuscitation. You describe in the line, "The first time I held you close, I caught fire." That kind of almost snaps you out of it in a way. Is that what happened? Is that what you're trying to convey?
I'm trying to convey in some ways, what I wish had occurred. And the first time I think I really held a child close may not have been in that moment. And yet I placed it back into that moment because I was there. I mean, I think I wanted to be present. I think that when you are having a major, bipolar depressive episode, which I was at the time, it's very hard to be present in anything. In some ways, it's hard to be present in the things that would most take you out of that space. So, yeah, I think that I think it's a very personal poem, but I also think that it's a piece that required a lot of drafts and a lot of feedback from my close readers from a distance to sort of push it to where it needed to go.
The word "this" in the opening line, striving to recall details of how this started, can mean so many things. This life, this relationship, this parenting, this tangle of emotions, this history, all the way to the last lines, this future heartbreak. As a reader, I love that you give me this work to do. to find my own meanings and understandings of what you might be referring to. As a podcaster, though, I want to ask you to unravel what you had in mind with the word "this" in the first and last lines of the poem.
I'm so not unraveling that. I think there's more than two types of poets, but there's this thing about how far do you talk about the intent of a phrase, or how much you sort of unravel that, or do you just, I think the fact that you're responded to that way means it's doing exactly what I want it to do. And I know what it means for me, and it's multifaceted for me, but that's all I'm going to say.
Fair enough. And I love the line. It's hard to say what kind of parents we'll become, because it's such an understatement, really. I mean, most of us are thrust in a role we're not ready for, have a very incomplete grasp of what's required, and left to learn on the job. And perhaps we never know, because we never cease becoming parents. And no doubt the perception our children have of our parenting will be very different to our own. And this line segues beautifully, I think, into the next poem you're going to read.
What is the next poem I'm going to read?
Octonaut.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, I chose this one because I suppose this poem, which, as a poet, I sometimes feel like every time you pull a collection out, there's one or two, they're not singles so much, but they are poems that strike a chord a particular way. Are they the best poems? I don't know. Maybe, but they strike a chord, a broader chord with, and resonate with a wider readership relative to how many people read poetry. But this one also really could have been in the drop-off, really. I think it's the beginning of the drop-off. I think every time I write a collection, there's one or two poems that foretell what the next work's going to be, and this one very much does. Octonaut. Every time scientists go into the midnight zone, they find a new species. My son is telling me this as he picks at his hands as if they're locks to release. Every time I'm with my son, I'm in that pitch dark, so familiar and unknown, looking for the luminescent when the lamp goes out. Walking across a footbridge, he tells me water is harder than concrete. Someone jumped from this very bridge last week. My son wants to know if he knew that fact before he leapt. I'm not sure what he knew. My son tells me even if he survived the fall, he wouldn't have been able to swim with broken limbs. Sometimes in the midnight zone, there are fish who pass by like sparklers, segmented worms, the snorkel masks of parents trying to understand that which breathes below the surface. All these specialists measuring depth. I don't know what my son sees when he swims alone. I know my son does not live in a world of perpetual darkness. I know he has colossal dreams. He's too tall for his strange thoughts. I don't need a doctor to use the word complex more than once. Every time scientists go into the midnight zone, they see someone's child floating like a lantern, reading alone in the corner of the sea's bed, waiting for experts to name their light.
I think in this poem, you have found the perfect metaphor for parenting. Each child is a new species, and as parents, we're always in that pitch dark, and we're always trying to understand that which breathes below the surface, as you put it. We're all caught in the mystery and the depths of what we can't fully apprehend. Can you recall, David, how the idea for this poem came to you? Was there an aha moment, or did you wrestle with it?
I feel like it's an intersection of two things. A period of taking my son to see a lot of specialists at a time that it was a particularly difficult time for them and for both of us separately as parents. But there was a particular specialist who, pediatrician, when we were trying to get a particular assessment done, who basically was sort of, I could see they were cornering Saul in a particular way into a particular diagnosis without listening to what their actual experience was. They were talking through them in a way. And it's an experience I'd had with psychiatrists And I could see the way they were being cornered into a lesser, reduced version of themselves.
Mm.
And I felt a desperate sadness and a kind of rage against that. And the lack of interest in either of our understanding of who this child was. And then that coalesced with walking across a particular bridge. I used to walk as a child on the way to my grandmother's at Oyster Bay on the way to Oatley. And yeah, this conversation is in there actually occurred to some degree on that bridge. And just the matter of fact way my son's mind, curious, but matter of fact way, they sort of talk to those sort of things was, it's like, oh, here's the full representation of the inner world of a child that's being ignored by these specialists. And then I started to think about different TV shows that had kind of come and gone, and I suddenly realized that like it's a submerged world. Being a parent is a submerged world. A child that isn't being seen is sort of under the surface of it all, and those different things came together.
Yeah, well, what didn't come out in the poem for me, I didn't get any sense of rage in the poem.
No, there's no anger in that poem at all. At all. I think that was like, I think what it was in the moment, but I think with time, when I came to write that piece, it was more just, I don't know. It's sort of like, it's trying to voice what wasn't spoken to in those moments, I think. And there's sort of like how we're alone in these experiences as parent and as children in these settings. And yet we're not, because there's lots of us in these little silos going through this collective kind of experience in these spaces. Yeah. I think it's probably, I don't know, it's probably you probably got this. There's a poem you kind of maybe proudest of. It's one of the poems that I didn't do as many drafts of. It was one of those poems that it just coalesced and I wrote it close to over a couple of days, which is rare because it was so clear to me what I wanted to say.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and I like the sort of venturing into the science side of things, and the repetition of the midnight zone, and all those things work. And the poem does something else that I love. It captures beautifully the tenderness in seemingly innocuous but nevertheless important conversations, between parents and children. They're daily occurrences, and that they come and they go, and we often don't stop and reflect on them. But this poem stops and does. It works with the moment in time, and the poem, even if the specialist didn't, the poem pays close attention, which is just wonderful.
It's one of the most beautiful notes about that poem I've ever heard. I love that you've highlighted the tenderness of that and can relate to that. Yeah, I felt that physically when you were talking about that. Thank you.
Yeah, it gives that moment so much depth and dimension. If I had written the poem, I think it would give me a fierce joy, not just in appreciating the interaction of the moment, but in being able to render it in a poem and share it with others. What do you?
It's given me immense joy, because of talking of, that's a non-fragmented poem. That I feel like that's a very whole poem, and one that has led to connecting with others, not just poets, other people, in a really tender, direct way. Yeah.
One of the things that I think comes out in this book is, and that we'll sort of talk about in the context of other poems, is butting heads against the system, of which there are many aspects. I suppose the medical system is what you're butting heads up against with here, and this, it's not uncommon for people not to be heard, and it's important, I think, for poetry to voice that. And the poem also taps into the fact, for me, that no matter how much we know, there's always a great deal that remains unknown. Even the specialists don't know. Do you regard poetry as, exploration, as sailing off into uncharted waters, of venturing into the unknown, And is that what you're trying to do in part in this poem?
Well, given how many sort of underwater motifs and references there are, I think the sailing off into the unknown analogy lands. I mean, yeah, I have a deep resistance to the idea of the concept of an expert, whatever it is. The idea that someone is positioning themselves as an expert on your child based on what often is theory or pushing a medication that is often a repainted drug without, like the idea of psychology as a science, that's the idea of absolutes in those spaces. Even in our sector, when you give your work over and you're told it was read by an expert reader, huge resistance comes out to me because there are very few, if any, all-knowing spaces. And I think once you position a person and their experience of something and their experience of themselves that way, I think it's dangerous. And same with the poem. I don't think any of my poetry is, all knowing. I'm happy for my poems not to have answers, but yeah, definitely love exploring where a particular thread or something that I'm bumping off takes me.
Wonderful. All right. Did you want to say anything else about this poem, or you want to get into the next lot?
Yeah, let's get into some more.
So you're going to read 4 segments of a very long poem, which is the title poem of the book, The Drop Off.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the poem afterwards, but yeah, I mean, I've been writing some longer poems and this is a longer sequence, but the little fragments, I'll just read 3 or 4. This is 4. The poem's called The Drop Off. 4. Living alone, you no longer let another adult know that a bath has been drawn. The temperature of the water adequate to cover the lack of warmth in a text confirming a medical appointment or the location of an errant toy. Such objects travel between places, taking notes of dispositions and the absence of our son, coexisting as childhood cargo, a constant reminder from 2 sets of shelves that an atom can be split like a home. 6. A child will begin to crave their parents reuniting. They'll express it in the way they linger at a door, drawings of 2 crayon faces merged into one, rapidly stroking your eyebrow with a wet thumb. Sleep becomes unsettled, moods verge on fragile. A pair of running shoes is filled with marbles. I made a wand. We baked an angel cake for you. The reunification fantasy taking concrete shape. You were away a lot that year. You treated your son as an inconvenience. You disappeared into the idea you were important. 9. Judgment-free zones are rarely free of judgment. The GP examines you both and frowns when you don't know a child's exact weight or what they ate the night before. The school advisor asks how things are at home and makes notes before you reply. At a birthday party, you drink wine instead of sparkling water, and the shitbox car you drive is barely roadworthy. Someone tries to set you up with another struggling mother. A circus of loosened strangers gathers around sushi and sprinkles, make most of their kids' food from scratch, endorse upscaled early life moments, and personalized parenting plans. Someone confides how hard it is to be both a father and a football coach. Within these conversations, you are smaller than a nuclear family. You watch your son ask for a balloon animal that doesn't exist. 11. Your son sends you a photo of a cat. You send him a photo of a dog. This is not a metaphor, nor the start of a conversation where you breach the protocol of distance. You can see his voice and he can hear your stare. Somewhere is not a place a face can disappear unless set as daily homework. You make a joke over the phone, knowing it's not funny to reassure a child that the world is still around. Dad jokes only work when nothing is at stake. It's his birthday soon. He'll send a picture of a cake, and you will send a picture of a candle.
You wanted to say something about the poem as a whole?
Yeah, that was I like it. I like the idea of spine poems in collections. And it ended up being the poem that sort of was the name of the book. It's numerically 3 till 18. It doesn't start at 1 because it starts with the age. I wanted to write a fragment, a glimpse, a particular distinct element of each year of co-custody. And I wanted to write it in third person, and I wanted to try and be honest about the experience, including who I was across those years. And I also wanted to wait until my son was 18 to read it, as Saul's read all the poems in this book before it became a public thing. So yeah, it took a while to write that sequence, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I was wondering why you started at 3. Now you've explained that. Thank you.
Yeah, I hate explaining things. Like, a few people have asked me that, and it's like, in some ways it's better you don't say, and then one day somebody just clicks. I love that. So that's the awful thing about talking about poetry sometimes, I think, is it removes a layer of like possibility, or you say the unsaid. But yes, that's why. Yep.
Yeah. No, I know. There's got to be a bit of mystery, and there's got to be work for the reader to do. But I was just confused, so I'm glad you told me.
I don't mind confusion too. I think that's always not the worst thing to have at times.
So, and this is a poem in many parts, 16 parts, I think, each of which is a fragment. I mean, it's really one moment in a year. And you're sharing with us today fragments of these fragments. So we only got a part of the poem. They explore aspects of your son's life, of split families, of co-parenting, being in and out of your child's life, absent and present, being at a distance, inadequate communications that don't work. And they read as a kind of series of vignettes into that experience. Did you start out with a specific intention to write, one little vignette per year, or did that sort of evolve?
It's a great question. No, I did not. That last one, 11, about send a picture of a cat. I sent a picture of a dog. That was the first poem. And that was written during the first COVID lockdowns in New South Wales, I think. When, the time between saying my son was becoming extended due to one house having COVID, or there were particular rules around travel between spaces, and things like birthdays and that, which I had missed before, but which had become increasingly important, weren't necessarily viable. These sort of significant demarcation points as a parent. And I just remember writing it, and as I do, I sometimes I don't anymore, but I used to use social media as like first draft. I just write something, throw it up there, and that was just written in very quickly, thrown up. And a few people read it and just responded to it. Deeply affected by it. A couple of writers wrote to me about it and said, "Is that yours?" Like that's kind of really spoken very directly to me. And it got me thinking about what are the things I'm most uncomfortable writing about, that I want to write about. And my absence as a parent was one of them. And I realized, okay, so this is, I like your sort of framing as vignettes. They are vignettes. I mean, they don't capture a whole year. They don't capture the full experience. They capture something. So I just went through, and look, some of them are even accurate. One might say age 9, but it might have been age 8. I don't know. It was just, I had more than that. At one stage, I had like probably 42. And what I did was sort of cut them down to what I thought were the essential ones to capture some of the things that I wanted to. the piece to sort of like communicate. But I also that piece and a lot of the pieces in this, I gave I had different close female readers read, parents and non-parents read these poems, including that one. And I was like, if there's anything here that's sort of like got a kind of like, bitterness, misogynistic, angry man, angry dad that's being, positions me too much in the context. You feel like I'm positioning myself as a victim of something. Call it out. Call it out. It's okay if there's like moments of like, unhappiness, or there is like anger and tensions, but what's the positionality in that? How do you read that? So yeah, that got rid of some of the vignettes. There were a couple that were like, no, that's got angry divorce man vibes, which is not, it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult to go through custody with somebody. You end up in this strange civil business relationship potentially with somebody who would normally, something is fractured and you would go apart. And there's a lot of things loaded in that, and other people weave in through that as well. So I wanted a kind of piece that was longer that kind of captured all of that, but didn't position people within that too much a certain way. That was sort of like had a broader kind of like take on it, and some honesty and integrity too. Yeah,
I was interested in your comment that you wanted to write into your discomfort. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, writing like the things you try to avoid writing about sometimes, I think, are sometimes the most interesting. And when I started writing this piece, I mean, of course, there's discomfort about having been an absent. I was literally a physically absent parent at times in my son's childhood. Um, and it's not about trying to like resolve that, or sort of like, but I wanted to write about the feelings around that and how that then led to me being present. Because I was also uncomfortable with that in a way, that kind of the arc of my parenting. But it's more than that. It's about like, it's about memory and time and how fractured that all can be, and also wanting to offer something to myself and my son through the art form that I have, which is poetry, that says, hey, I've often been very uncomfortable with being a dad and still can be, but here's the full experience, even if some of it's really uncomfortable to document.
Yeah, I'm here now.
Yeah, and I've been here in many ways right through, but by being here now is also acknowledging that discomfort and absence, which I think it is important. I didn't want any of the art to kind of be driven by guilt or catharsis, which it's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's possibly doing the poem a disservice to extract anything out of the little pieces that you read, but I'm going to do it anyway. You say in one of these poems, judgment-free zones are rarely free of judgment. It's a great line. There is, of course, the judgment of others, from GPs to school advisors to other parents. But these poem fragments are also full of self-judgment too, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not a bad thing, necessarily.
No, I mean, when I wrote the line, you treated your son as an inconvenience. I mean, it's easier when it's not first person to write that. The you is very useful. I think it allows a softening into the truth. That's one of the lines I'm most proud of, because it's true. I was like, oh, that's articulated something so specifically to how I felt at that time and how I acted. So I was like, that's great. That's great that, language can do that for us.
And there's a weave of three parties in the poem: the narrator, the ex-spouse, and the child, all in orbit around one another and their own needs and struggles. both connected and disconnected. There's a kind of dance of necessity at play. And you're saying, if it would otherwise be a fractured relationship, it wouldn't continue, but you have to continue it. Are you suggesting in this poem that the ties that bind in their fragmented way are both blessing and curse? Is that too hard?
I mean, I'll leave that up to the 180 people that buy the book. But
that many? You're doing well.
I was being ambitious for this setting only, David. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I'm not really a binary kind of person in a lot of ways. Blessed, cursed. I mean, I think what you said about a dance of necessity is really accurate. And that's the minimum with which anyone should approach that. And writing it was a kind of dance of necessity for me as well. I mean, it's that thing where I wouldn't necessarily change most of the experiences that lead to a poem like this existing. And, things fragment in life the way that they sometimes need to. And that was a fragmentation that needed to occur, and it led to a lot of challenges and a lot of beauty, but ultimately a child who's been collectively, collaboratively loved, but also a lot of honesty about the not so great parts of that, which this poem also talks to.
I mean, in some ways, you're on a hiding to nothing being a parent, whatever the circumstances, you're always bound to fail. So
spoken like a true parent. Yeah, again, I don't know. I think that it's interesting, these binaries you could bring up, like failure, success. What does that even look like? What does it look like as a poet? What does it look like as a parent? What does it look like as a poet trying to write about parenting?
Yeah.
That's why the judgment-free zones of rarely free of judgment. I think that applies to beyond a parenting context. So there's so many contexts that applies. And I suppose there's always awareness for me. I feel like on one level, I feel a lot of myself in poems like this, and other ways I don't. The examples sort of create a distance, and the third person creates, in some degree, a necessary shield if you're going to write about these things. You can't write about things to complete another expense of your own self and those around you. But it is important, I think, as a poet, if you're called to or need to write into these things with some honesty.
And I mean, the poems in a way document a trajectory of growth, don't they?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, they do literally in terms of time and a child, but I hope, I think by the last two of those, the growth of where I arrived at as a parent. I mean, I'm one of those people that I think I'm a fantastic parent for teenagers and a child becoming adults. Like my son and I are very close. But it's an equally important to kind of like acknowledge, if you're going to write about those things, the periods and ages maybe you weren't so great at once you look at them. And I've only been a parent once. Don't know what that experience would have been like again, but this is the best I can do in a poem to capture that kind of range of experience.
Okay. You mentioned before this poem that you're going to read next, Recline.
Yeah, I've chosen a couple of long ones. Sorry about that.
No, it's good.
There are short ones in here too. But Recline. I'll just read it. Recline. Openings can be challenging. Where to sit everyone who has a chair named after them. Opera chair from investment banking requires ergonomics. Being chair of an arts org is both pleasure and responsibility. Chair now an object now belonging to or associated with person. Not everyone can be given the name of a monarch. I enter my name into a chair name generator. It asks me what I currently do in life. I work in an office. I do not work in an office. How often I work out will assist in calculating a title, whether I see infrastructure as big or small. There's an art to naming furniture. There is more at stake than any newborn child due to levels of production. Seeking visceral connection with consumers. Everybody wants a throne. Nobody dignifies a toilet. IKEA has the process down to a science. All have Scandinavian origins. Beds have Norwegian place names, seating Swedish ones. In my next life, I will return as a Stavanger Queen ensemble. I will be a port to strangers' dreams, a berth for bodies, ferrying the traffic of pleasure boats, paying tribute to cruise administration. No mention of chairs were made in the Bible. The more you rely on a backrest, the more you tend to slump. Companies fund chairs as part of good corporate citizenship. Jesus was not a good corporate citizen. He liked to stand up. Billionaire is padded soft beige eco leather with vintage walnut. Just 1 in 10 ASX 200 chairman is a woman. I sit in this lounge chair and watch the first season of shows. I sit on this swivel chair and preside over search engines. Look up things with a back and 4 legs that can't walk. Dream of a chair to carry the day weight of dreaming. I look up dream chair online and become 2 inches of foam. A well-endowed chair requires chutzpah. Catbird seat is the best place to chew the air of a president. As Ellen DeGeneres says, leaning forward in your chair when someone is trying to squeeze behind you isn't enough. We will break down before the office chair, these bare ends not built to comprehend how many of us there really are. Microplastics have been found lodged deep in the tissue of living people for the first time. There is increasing concern about hazards within us. We have each swallowed the equivalent of 100 stackable chairs. Our lungs are an auditorium of unsustainable applause.
Well, now I know how to pronounce your name, which I mispronounced. Sorry.
Well, no, I say Stavanger. Stavanger is the kind of harder, like Norwegian and the port in Norway, and actually Stavanger is not my birth surname. It's an extension of an Orkney name, Stanger. From my dad's side, so I changed it. That's a whole other story. We needed a whole other podcast for why there's an extra A and a V in my name.
You're going to come back as a bed ensemble. I like it. The chair is ubiquitous, and because of that, somehow it's rendered almost invisible, taken for granted. So we tend to think of chairs primarily in terms of suitability or comfort. Are you suggesting in this poem that there is a lot more to a chair than meets the eye?
Look, this is one of those pieces I'm not exactly sure what I'm suggesting. You'd have to ask the chair. I think this is one of those poems where a whole lot of ideas kind of came together and focused on a particular object.
And little tangents in the middle of it.
Yeah, and I like to go on tangents and riffs. Part of those was just going on like weird ideas, looking in a search engine and then writing off some strange article. The blessing of that poem was it was sitting there unfinished. It is that is a very much a poem of fragments stitched together.
Yeah.
That I think intersect enough with some lines written in between couplets in between to stitch some of those ideas together. But it was sitting there when I read this article about microplastics being found in people, and that's when the poem really landed. I was
because I did not see that coming until it came.
No, neither did I. It was actually an absurdly silly piece, even more so than that. Again, most of that was written in lockdowns, remote working, the idea of what's an office, what's space, what's a chair, this chair that I'm spending more time on than anything else, from paid labor through to searching for things, through to viewing things, that period where everything sort of small and objects like that became the most familiar. And yeah, when I saw that story, it was like, it started out with the idea of VIP arts events and the importance of, where was I? Maybe the ACO, there was a designated chairs name for particular sponsors. I was really struck by that. The need for someone to have a chair named after them, and then ended with a story about microplastics. I'm like, okay, There's
I
the
mean, there might be silliness there, but there's serious undertones, aren't there? I mean,
oh yeah, no, it became something else. I mean, there's a lot of poems in here which I suppose are my own versions of eco poetry. In terms of environmentally, the concerns I have as a poet, a human, a parent. It's deeply disturbing to me that the chair I'm sitting on, parts of that have broken down to a degree that they're lodging parts of my one working kidney and my brain and things like that, and like so similarly with my son and anyone I know. Yeah, but also I suppose the idea of like no, it's not just about a chair; it's about the power of naming things and who gets to do that, and then the kind of the need to brand things is something that always
yeah.
I like to sort of, I don't know, interrogate in my own particular way.
Yeah, and the poem definitely intersects poetry and capitalism as a lived experience. Because you've mentioned, investment banking, opera chairs, company funded chairs, billionaire chairs, well endowed chairs. What is the poem saying about that intersection?
It's saying that the class divide's getting wider all the time. It's saying that there are those that can afford to be in a theatre space, say, and those that have chairs named after them. It's saying that billionaires go to particular sites to buy particular seats, that being one of the recommendations, the walnut leather item compared to a lot of the masses going into IKEA and building furniture from scratch and then flipping it around and having one of those items then named after you as a kind of like, I don't know, turning that kind of like upside down. I think I don't know. I think this is a time of great class division, and I think it's even as simple in terms of the chairs we sit on and who gets a seat where.
Mm. I had no idea that chair name generators were a thing until I read this poem, and then I did an exercise. I got on a chair name generator, and that was very interesting.
What did you come up with? What was your chair called?
Oh, it was some ridiculous thing. I can't remember. I didn't write it down.
Oh, deeply disappointed, David. Such a lost
Sorry,
opportunity.
in that binary sense, I failed. We do have, as you've noted, an obsession with naming things. What do you think? What do you think that's about? The art to naming furniture. Is it our human need to fix and contain things within names, or is something else going on?
I mean, again, talking about experts, I'm no expert on naming and what the human drive is to do that. But um, I do think that's that kind of very much in capitalism's interest to have something named. If a chair's named as a particular thing and it's something that then is there's something aspirational attached to that brand and that named, that sort of like it's in none of our interests, and yet somehow we're always buying into the idea of like a brand, even like the importance of the poet versus the importance of the book, like what's in a name. I think that yeah, I was really struck, and also just riffing in one part about the insane power of naming a human being. Crazy. And yet, and here's some sort of, there'll be some sort of like small division or large division mark. And also like the increasing impact of marketing has on so many parts of our life. I mean, marketing has a huge influence in shaping the literary sector. But also there'd be some sort of subset division, marketing division, naming chairs somewhere for all of us to choose while we sit there, those with our parents naming children. And there's something about both those levels of power which kind of struck me. Okay, so this poem is called Sister. I don't think we ever met. There was sometimes talk of you at the neighbor's barbecue, in the silences where sausages burn and affairs begin. I once caught a glimpse of you and my mother, her frame racked over the bathroom sink, sobbing until you came to be in the passing salt. My father never spoke of you, or perhaps he did in his way, rearranging a child's room until it became his own, collecting newspapers in case there was mention of a girl missing, a photo of curls shaping a blurred face. The bones of small animals would turn up at the front door as if something was trying to form. Mum told me about you as an act of forced disclosure, another thing to hold underwater with my breath. As there was no death, there is no way to know if you were partial to flowers in your hair. Sometimes the night's air would take your voice, a phantom note full of a sibling's undelivered promise. There wasn't a backyard tree or shadow that didn't seek to hide you. The higher you climbed, the less we looked. Some in this family have become unspoken, broken water no one wants to swim in. Those wet footprints where you walked into this house and shivered, waiting for us to hold the idea of more together. I never asked if you were delivered. An empty album without dates, words like unborn stored in the pockets of whispers. We buried our dog in the backyard that year, a shared grave with a small cross on top. Classically, ghosts manifest because of others' unfinished business. The day I was told she didn't exist was the day I stopped digging.
I didn't plan on asking you this, but it just occurred to me to ask you this. The form of the poem seems to be a prose poem justified, and it's just almost a continuous narrative. Clearly, that's deliberate. What were you trying to do with that form?
Sometimes, I mean, I like including prose poems in every collection I do, and I like prose poems that have dialogue across the page. There's a second prose poem called Kale. Both are more narrative than they tend to be more narrative and talk to us, like try to capture straight into the middle of something and try to capture something narrative that in some ways thematically is speaking across the pages. I think with that one, there's a safety in the, I feel a safety at sometimes into containing in a justified concrete poem like that particular emotions in poetry. And I think that poem is writing into a lot of, I mean, it's sort of like writing into family mythology in my family. And it felt kind of solid to have it contained in a prose poem.
Well, the poem itself is a container.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's why I think that's not a poem to allow a lot of space. There's enough unspoken in that poem as it is.
I want to ask you about your opening line. You don't say, as you might have done, "We never met." Instead, you say, "I don't think we ever met." Is that about memory, or is it you trying to say something else there?
It's not about memory. It's about intergenerational traumas, and it's about the way, and it's about family secrets, and it's about the way they in of themselves manifest themselves as, the degree where they seem like they're an actual being. They're here with you. So yeah, some grief and some loss in families it's kind of diffuse, and the mythology and the avoidance of topics actually heightens their presence. And that's sort of like, yeah, there's an uncertainty about to what degree is this here, which I wanted to capture.
Yeah. So you're speaking to the unspoken.
Yeah, I suppose you could. I suppose you could frame it that way. I mean, it's one of those poems that a few people have made it about particular things in the experiences they've had, and I kind of wanted it to do that because I think that, yeah, I think there are unspoken things in family which are also, in many ways concretely and constantly present. And
Yes.
that was one I wanted to write about because I've carried it around a long time and it doesn't kind of belong to me. And yet over time, it very much became something that was mine that I never chose to receive.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm being obtuse, but it's kind of an
No,
obtuse poem in a
yeah, no,
way. Like grief is obtuse. Like not every grief is direct. Like it's held across a family sometimes.
I mean, the poem sometimes speaks of sometimes talk of you, a glimpse of you, a girl missing, something was trying to form, a phantom note, an empty album, and so on. I kept looking for the word echo in the poem because to me it reads like an echo, almost an echo chamber. Is it? I think it clearly is about unfinished business.
Hmm. I mean, I think there's a big difference between echo and an echo. I always think of echo chamber in the context that it's used in sort of like political discourse today, but it's a classic idea of an echo chamber where something bounces off walls acoustically. Yeah. I think this poem is an echo. Can family skeletons, family trauma, family grief ever be finished business? Like,
Mm.
I don't think so. That's
Mm.
so, yeah. But maybe it's just like it's an ongoing, continuing echo that I wanted to, in some small way, within a container of a prose poem, um, put down. Um, yeah, it's probably one of the more personal poems in the collection for me.
Mm. I mean, it's directly on point to your themes of fragments and fragmentation, absence and presence, and the poetry of the incomplete. So, what for me permeates the poem is a profound sense of loss. Um, how we can grieve for that which we never had, in a way,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
Gee,
for that to happen, we have to acknowledge the loss, which is what the poem does. Was writing this poem part of a process for you to come to terms with that absence?
it was to give myself a permission that no one else could give me to articulate something I had carried for a long time that wasn't necessarily mine to begin with, but very much became mine within the context of my family. And by the way, I come from a very fragmented family as well.
Mm.
So fragmentation, you know, intergenerational fragmentation is also, part of my and a lot of people's experience. But yeah, um, yeah, I think that's all I've got to say on that poem, really, except that it's a bit like Octonauts. I feel it's an effective poem. And then I finished it and I was like, it's doing exactly what I want it and need it to do, which is a really nice moment that you don't always get that often. And also, it's a lyrical narrative poem, and I mean, when you can distill something on one page, writing in that style, that's something that you come away with, and it sort of, I think those poems stay with you differently.
Having articulated it, did something shift?
Great question. Yeah, I think that's one of those poems that definitely, and the conversations that have come out of that poem when I do read it, continue to shift something
Mm.
for me. And permissions within the idea of permissions within families and the things families as a vessel carry around without ever discussing. Yeah.
Mm. Throughout the poem, you speak of the sister as you. Then in the last line, you switch to the day I was told she didn't exist. Was that to finally place some distance between you and her to stop digging and let her go?
This is starting to be a lot like my clinical psychotherapy fortnightly sessions that I can barely afford but often need, which is great. Uh, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, probably to some degree. I think that's an important shift there in the release of the last line.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. Want to read another one?
Sure. Great questions. Like the way you've kind of like got inside these poems and then kind of like extending out back to the poet is yeah, it's a bit of a gift, to be honest. This one changes tone quite a bit. This one's called Child Calculator. It's not too long, I don't think, but I've got to find it somewhere in here.
Age 66.
You're so prepared. I love it. Thank you. That's amazing. It's called Child Support in brackets Calculator. If you do not know some of the other parent's details, then the estimate will be incorrect. If you do not know some of the other parent's care information, then the estimate will be incorrect. If you do not know how many children you want to support, then the estimate will be incorrect. If you do not know the number of nights, you might find the night estimator useful. If you have any other dependent children, declare them as a depreciating asset. Self-employed parents are loopholes. Only nurses and doctors can claim non-slip shoes. You can add up a child. A child is made up of 50% care and 50% cost. Extracurricular activities cannot be covered. A pair of runners need to outlast the desire to run. There may be a terminating event. If the child dies or becomes a member of a couple, you no longer have to pay child support. This is not David acting as Saul. This is where the soul intersects with machine. When circumstances change, split all costs into sounds. This is a case being activated. This is an account being closed. Only contact us if you think this decision is correct. It's easier to separate than it is to end this assessment.
Child support is part of that many-headed hydra that parents often find themselves butting their heads against, where soul intersects with machine, as you put it. Is this poem just about the impersonality of that system, how it can seem like a one-size-fits-all apparatus, and about the complexity and frustration of navigating it, or were you thinking of other things too when you wrote it?
It's absolutely about that. It's not like I have no issue with child support. I think it's such a necessary thing, and well, thank goodness it exists. And it's very gendered in terms of which parents tend not to pay it. That's well documented. So, but the process and the kind of online clinical remove it all, and the strange specific phrasing of questions. I don't know. It's like, there is a line: if you do not know some of the other parents' details, then the estimate will be incorrect. That's so. I mean, it has to be distance, but there's such a strange kind of remove and such a deep frustration most of us who end up in those systems feel, because often they're after details that you either don't know or can no longer obtain, and you're alone with this form, unable to contact somebody in person. But there's a coldness also to, like, I found the idea of, like, the one way you get out of child support is if your child dies, and they framed it as a terminating event. And I found, yeah, that there's something almost inhumane to kind of reduce it down to that for the sake of a bureaucratic process. And I love messing with any kind of, like, government form, government process, government language that we find ourselves in, and to use erasure, remix, repurpose language to kind of heighten the both the absurdity, but also the way it reduces our own humanness in what is a very human moment for us that a lot of us have to go through.
Mm. I'm just thinking about you're making me think really about language and the use of language. Because child support by definition is to support children, right? But in orienting it that way, does it overlook the necessity to provide support to the parents of those children, for those who have to interact with the bureaucracy of child support?
Look, I'm a great believer in when people separate that, putting the child's needs and putting the child first. I mean, I think that's just an essential principle, which is sometimes overlooked in moments of hurt, pride. I remember seeing when I was going through a separation divorce, seeing a lawyer who just said, pride is often what leads to people ending up in family court. It isn't even the kind of grief or woundedness, it's pride. And that really, really stuck with me. So yes, I do think parents need support, and I do think there are places for that. I think a lot of people, I think single parenting and encountering bureaucracy as a single parent is a deeply alienating experience at times for people. And again, there's a whole class thing there around, levels of literacy and
Computer access.
a lot of this is online now. And a lot of the phrasings, even I had to think over them 2 or 3 times to say, what is this actually asking me? Yeah, and I think that line in the palm that a child is 50% care, 50% cost, because the fact there is a child support calculator, like there is a mortgage calculator, where you can work out via night how many hours, your income, et cetera, and then through this, and it's needed. There is some sort of system in order to do that, but then to be spat out at the end is that you're this percentage, you owe that percentage, you're this percentage of care. The mathematics of that is again, I spoke to that before, but it is incredibly reductive, and in moments makes you feel less than you are in this actual being's life. So yeah, I'm playing, and also it's it's the deep frustration of being in that space online while having actual feelings. That's what the poem's trying to, speak to.
I've suddenly, it's an epiphany. I've suddenly found a connection between a chair name generator and a child support calculator. Don't ask me how.
This is how I spend my nights, David. Well, used to. I don't know. There's probably a trifecta that I work out. I'll let you know what the third part of that is.
Okay. This taps into something else, this poem. I think we live in a world of data collection, too much. Often feels that far more information is collected than is actually necessary for the purposes for which it's collected. Is this poem railing against that reality in the child support context?
Yeah, I mean, once you become a parent and once you get into the sort of Centrelink parenting system, you give over a huge amount of information.
But it's not just once, is it? It's continuously.
No, it's continuously, and all this data then has impacts on payments and level of care, and the percentage to which you can see yourself as a primary carer, and all this. Yeah, you're constantly in relation to that. I mean, it's a huge relief to not be in relationship to now have a 19-year-old child where I'm not dealing with any of that. They're all needed, but yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's exhausting. That's the other thing.
Another stressor. I mean,
it's an exhausting thing.
If you're parenting on your own, your hands are pretty full as it is, without having to, devote time and energy to trying to understand, navigate your way through the administrative side of things.
Absolutely. Even if you're parenting with someone, or you're parenting occasionally on your own in a co-custody, whatever it is, yeah, it's exhausting enough. But yeah, I think that I don't think I can say much more to that piece. I think it kind of, yeah, it, 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 it yeah, parenting meets machine.
I mean, you set it out almost in its form, like a form.
Yeah, I have a lot of form poems as form across many collections, and yes, that one I nearly there's lots of little square boxes in there
Yes.
which aren't in direct relationality to the questions, but the idea that you could just like just tick every box there, just do them all. Here you go. Here's 20 boxes in a row. Just tick them.
Yeah. All right. Let's get on to the next one.
This one, well, yeah. I have a series of poems in here, which I suppose are more to do with what are they to do with? I suppose cost of living and real estate. Anyway, this is called Review. Real estate agent sends me a new lease with a larger increase than prior years. I suggest a halfway place where we can meet in the middle of their increased costs, servicing a Lexus, branded gym gear, and my decreasing faith in secure future housing, the outsourcing of angels. The lease has both landlords listed, investment couple, so I looked them up online. They're on a podcast talking about buying 9 properties in 15 months. In that same period, I ate approximately 51 Coles croissants, have much gravitas to show for it. One of their websites is about building empires, selling things people want to buy, like ads for clients, anything platinum, conceptual coins, and the biggest life lessons. That it's not easy to turn around a cruise ship, and there's a good reason niche rhymes with rich, which it doesn't. But who am I to correct? He provides offshore staffing solutions. I find a post of theirs on socials about passing government taxes onto tenants, which makes it sound like a baton, as if we're in the same race, as if we're both really living under the same roof, and I will get to cross the line between us. Their main childhood recollection seems to be about imported products, lessons learnt in their 20s, that a party is all about the numbers and money never gets old. I am getting older, prefer small gatherings. The main thing I learned in my 20s is that people like them will always take the last beer from your fridge.
When I saw the title of the poem before I read it, I thought, oh, this is going to be a poem about a review of a poetry collection or a poem. But no, it's about another interface with what we amorphously often refer to as the system, but one that can have a very profound and negative impact on lives where housing insecurity is a very real factor. Was the suggestion of a halfway, I have to ask you this, the suggestion of a halfway place where we can meet in the middle taken up?
No, I mean, I really want to foreground. I'm fortunate. Like I rent, and have now for many decades. I once had a mortgage on a house for 3 years, but my mental illness at the time led me to having to quit as a psychologist and then no longer having a mortgage. So yeah, but I'm also currently in a relatively well-paid arts job, which I've never had before. And so there is some buffer there. But if I hadn't got that job just before COVID, I would have been in huge, huge financial distress at that particular time. So I think the framing's important. But yeah, it's been really noticeable. And I mean, it's become a discourse since COVID in particular. It was already getting bad, but rental reviews are happening every year with minimum 10% interest, 10% increases, with minimum and with no points of negotiation. And it just struck me as like, this is just an assumed thing now. Real estate agents will write to you, they wrote to me the other day saying, we, myself, the real estate agent, we really have to consider the landlord's expenses right now and what they're going through, kind of framing in relation to a very basic request to fix something on the property. Yeah, I feel like there needs to be a huge pushback, and there is in different ways. And my way was to go, who are these people? So I researched them.
So this is all true.
Well, some of it's expensive, you know.
Nine helps.
Is it all true? But like
I mean, it's true.
if people in these spaces choose to be caricatures, if you then take it further, then that's
I mean, it's
a poetic license. Yeah.
It's speaking a truth.
Yes, yes. And particular things were on their podcast, and they would sort of think, what else would these people say on a podcast? So yeah, I think that's what that poem's sort of about. And it's also sort of maybe again talking to that like increasing, class divide, that 10%, which is increasingly a conversation. I mean, a lot of poets, I mean, the work that like Subden do in particular, and Industrial Estate, that magazine about working class poets, I think that's a space we need to do a lot more with in the literary sector. The poetry of privilege, the poetry of the kind of not just underrepresented, but the kind of economically reduced, cost of living, cozy living's become like a bit of like a meme, but it's like the reality of it is, I'm seeing it right across the arts, and a lot of poets and writers who are barely getting by at the moment.
The reality is brutal.
Yeah.
And like you say, there's a growing inequality, an ever-widening gap between the haves and the have-nots here, more so in the US, but certainly here, which I think can't be more starkly put than the way you put in the poem, between buying 9 properties and eating approximately 51 Coles croissants, which wouldn't be too good for your health. But anyway, so the poem goes to this...
Depressed people crave carbs, David. It's just the way it is.
Whatever works, isn't it? So the poem, refers to this great divide between the narrator and the people like them, as you put it, who will always take the last beer from your fridge. What comes across is that the wealthy are addicted to wealth and can't have enough of it. That there's not just appetite for wealth, but greed and selfishness in the pursuit of it. Is that what this is saying?
Yeah, I think that's part of my own discomfort. And I think the labels we embrace is up to each individual. But like, that's why I've had huge discomfort when I have been put in mental health settings to be called a consumer, because to me, these are the real consumers. Like, this is all about consumption and how much can be consumed, and no concern for what is and who is being consumed in that in that process. Yeah, and it's like, it's an easy juxtaposition that was offered to me, but also just the fact again that we just have this, like, it's like a birthday now or an anniversary. We have an annual rental review. You just put it in, like, like in terms of a graph of significant moments in the year, there's one of them now.
Yeah.
It's a pretty simple poem. It does what it does. I mean, I love the line, niche rhymes with which it doesn't. That's one of those lines that I get a lot of joy reading live, because of, like, yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you've had any pushback from, anyone who's taken umbrage at this, because, they're wealthy and they don't act like that.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, my preamble for this poem is, there any tenants in the room? And then I say, is there any landlords? And then I say, does anybody here have an investment portfolio? When I was in Byron Writers Festival, I also asked, does anybody own an Airbnb? And, there's a discomfort, but there's, if you're uncomfortable with the fact that you own Airbnb or a huge investment portfolio, and most of your assets and wealth is based off property, people's homes being your business, and you're uncomfortable and guilty and ashamed of that, you really need to look at that. Like, if this poem is making you feel uncomfortable, this small poem, then it says a lot about it, that the mechanisms that are being exploited and are part of the crew that don't really want to change things.
I don't think they're uncomfortable at all.
Well, some people are. Some people want to be wealthy and at the expense of others and also not be called out on it.
Mm.
I think that's a human tendency to want to hold both things at once. So, and it's poets' jobs to call. I think part of poets' job, not our only job, is we have the ability to call things out in a really immediate, direct way, and particularly in live settings, not just on the page. So, yeah, it's kind of great if there are some people in the room that are uncomfortable, because then there's a tension for the piece, and it kind of heightens the way it lands in those spaces. Yeah.
Mm. Cool. You got another one?
Sure. Um I'm gonna follow this with Kill All the Birds. I feel like they kind of go together. Is that okay?
Yeah. It's just so long as you
Uh,
go back to A Boy Walks Between His Parents, because I really want to do that one.
I thought I'd get this last sort of like sharper piece out of the way, but yes, I absolutely will. I love that poem, so yes. Kill All the Birds. The noise causes ear cancer, at the very least auditory hair cell loss, increases the mortality of feathers, diverts the flyways of gulls and terns, creating avian graveyards. Birds are public animals of capitalism. These farms that span whole sea fields that won't work as a breeze, lacks accuracy or representativeness. I'm no expert, but the Bureau doesn't seem to know a lot about wind. Truth is, turbines complicate property enjoyment. They will be highly visible, like retirees at auctions. Eyewitness accounts state they shrink the horizon, decreasing the value of a holiday house, limiting grandchildren's selfies, ruining the beautiful view. The visual impact is of particular interest. The industrialization of oceans damages local cafe ecosystems, disrupting Great Southern Mail's migration sites. It's sending the cetaceans crazy, shortening their exalted plume, separating mothers from calves, disorientating dolphins, colliding with dream catchers, altering cocaine shipping routes. Now the fish have tinnitus. They can't hear their fins, swimming circles in benthic habitats, disturbing underwater cultural heritage. They're finding congenital malformations in mermaids, the unmaking of the sea's bed. It's a blight on our coastline. These windmills aren't real movement. We are the Citizens Clear Skies Network, chanting physical presence at online protests. We fear these acoustic engineers calling upon stray electricity. Didn't move to this pristine leisure environment to be looking out at the future. Got to give our heirs something to own. We don't want to make sacrifices, be made disciples of air currents. Even when streamlined, truth is an elusive creature.
I can see why you wanted to read that one after the other one.
Yeah, they kind of, if I do a set, I looked at the order we talked about, like, nah, let's do that one now.
Yeah.
We're in that space.
I want to pick up on a couple of there's many threads in this poem. I want to pick up on a couple of them. I want to start with the idea of legacy. This poem is about turbines and birds, but it seems to me its broader interest is in legacy, in the often unforeseen and unintended consequences of our actions and what that will mean for future generations, the something we give our heirs to own. Is that a fair comment, that this is what you're focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I think it's like, yeah, an obsession with the legacy of now to pass on to a future version of ourselves in a particular context, while not looking to the now in terms of the broader legacy of, in this case, the earth and the unwillingness, I suppose, the smallness of family and financial legacy in terms of, in relation to the broader, what is the kind of Earth's legacy now, at a time where these things we need to give up. We all need to give things up, like absolutely more than ever. Most of us are going to have to give something up, I think. And this piece came out of the context of this piece is it came out of me, community Facebook pages. So being on two Facebook pages down here, the Port Kembla community Facebook page, and another one, is it Thrull maybe? I think it was a Thrull community Facebook page. when the proposal was put wind farms off the coast here, it was just absolutely flooded with mis and disinformation. And, all this coalition of strange far right groups that flood these topics and then bring in all sort of other kind of, false data, deep sort of like misinformation wells, but also just that what those things feed into, which is a much deeper fear of change at the expense to ourselves, and how, extreme that kind of like can coalesce in those spaces. And I was really struck by it online. It was like a roar even to read. And I was like, that's really interesting. I want to write about that.
Mm. I want to ask also about your reference to truth in the poem. First, we say truth is turbines complicate property enjoyment. And then the last bracketed lines, even when streamlined, truth is an elusive creature. Is the final reference to truth questioning the first?
I love when someone reads your work and sort of points out things like, yeah, I mean, I do like to invert the possibilities of a phrase or an idea or, something that seems declarative. But that, I think the truth is like, that's the way a lot of these sort of the positionality of those people that are like anti sort of like, green energy or anti, change as we move forward into a world that needs to respond to things. Its position up front as truth is absolute. And the fact is that truth is an elusive creature. I mean, I think in many ways, like, the poem isn't particularly positing the reader. I'm not trying to posit the reader or the idea that I'm pro or anti anything, just more documenting the way truth is sort of like deeply elusive and abused in these spaces to take a position.
Highly contestable.
And highly contestable to a degree. But I mean, it became it became absolutely kind of, it was on steroids around this. Like, false studies being put online about, whales, migration patterns, the death of birds off the coast, particular species, referencing the hearing impairment of other coastal communities that had these nearby. And I just thought, I was like, oh wow, hang on a minute, but what about the mermaids? What about the kind of like cocaine shipments? Like, I wanted them to go further. I said, okay, I'll take it further. You've missed so many arguments here. I'll go there for you. Yeah.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question. Like, a lot of tongue in cheek going on with those sort of, damaging local cafe ecosystems and congenital malformations in mermaids and so on. Which brings me to the tone of the poem. Can you say something about the tone of the poem and what you're trying to do with the tone of the poem?
I mean, yes, it is tongue in cheek and absurdist in tone. It's also, I think there's a kind of rage there as well that I feel around people that are entitled, that want to hold on to the piece of land or space they're on as if we own anything, and as if we're not a collective that need to kind of collectively make decisions. That the short-sightedness of us just looking at our immediate space, our immediate people, and thinking as long as they're okay. And then there is that, there is a tone of like me actually kind of like, I think there's a curiosity to this piece of what is truth in this context when around these sort of things, and maybe a degree of sadness. I think this piece could be read several ways.
Yeah. Do you think it's part of a series of poems? Like, the problems are all around us and there's so many of them. We could keep writing about it, trying to knock down the door somehow and get through.
Yeah, I mean, what does a poem do? I don't know. but a poem that doesn't exist doesn't do anything, does it? So like and I think this is my local area. This is an issue here, and I'm tied to it and tied to this conversation by living here. So to not kind of like explore it, and I've been reading it locally with mixed reactions, because again, this is one of these areas where there's a lot of there's a lot of division, and I think to write into that, there is a degree of like interrogating that kind of division, or the need to position people in relation to something that could actually be, maybe we just stick with some of the actual studies and facts rather than sort of blow this out into these other areas and create these online kind of anti-wind farm campaigns.
So what's happened with the wind farm? Is it?
There's still studies being done. It's still proposed. There's a lot of, pushback against it down here at the moment. I mean, Illawarra is a very socially engaged community. I mean, Port Campbell is a really strong Labor town. There's an huge anti-nuclear movement here when they want to put, bring nuclear elements to the port. So it's a great town to be in terms of like, it has that strong unionist collective action kind of energy. It always has. Well, way back, it's very much been a workers' town. So I feel like if you're a poet in the area you're in, and there are these strong threads, you can't not write into them sometimes. And this is one of the ones that sort of, I responded to. Yeah.
All right. Can you go back now to A Boy Walks Between His Parents?
I can. This will be my second last poem. A boy walks between his parents, holding both their hands. We cannot see their faces, only his, full of confused wonder and dread, but not joy. A boy in between two adults cannot carry such possibilities alone. He's wearing the same outfit he wore the day they parted ways, just before he was 4 and old enough to stand on one foot for more than 9 seconds. Cannot recall walking without them or with them. Their faces are too far away to say if they are still faces. They are not walking towards anything, though things are moving, passing by like a first front tooth or lying together on an unmade bed. In his head, he is holding their hands, but in this moment they are holding him, the way passing clouds contain passing rain. This image will let go, and their collective sky will not clear for years, no matter what weather the boy holds, in his head or with his hands.
I feel like this is another one of those poems that you're going to be really happy with. The opening line, a boy walks between his parents holding both their hands, seems on the one hand to be like a commonplace observation, happens all the time, but it's also to me such a powerful, evocative image that I'm sure it resonates with all parents. Did the poem arise from and cohere around that line?
Yeah, it's a bit like, I think it's probably the closest poem in relationship to the first poem I read. I've been thinking about your birth lately, where the line, a boy walks between his parents, came to me, ended up the title, and the title is built into the poem. So yes, I think that's really the kind of central conceit, central image. It's kind of beautiful. It's really raining here. I don't know if it is there at the moment.
It is. Yeah, it is.
There was a real, just reading that, and because kind of the idea of internal, external weather, reading that while it was raining here alone, in the house, and my son moved out earlier in the year. Talk about absence. I really felt, sometimes you really feel a poem, like this is a great film podcast that talks about, not about the best film you've seen, but the context in which you saw the film and the impact that had. And I feel sometimes that's like with poems. Where were you when you read that poem in your life or geographically? And I don't know. That was a really, I really inhabited the poem then. Anyway, that's an aside, but I think it's important, like the way we inhabit poems and the way poems really hit us at particular places and times. I think that I like the way you point that out, that it's also, it's a very, in many ways, generic everyday image. and yet somehow when I wrote it down, it has a kind of a weight to it, and like the child is connector between these two adults, and how breakable that is for everybody in that chain. And yet I look back on that with such fondness too. Like, what a beautiful thing to experience with anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I feel that. And it brought to mind, similar experiences I've had with my kids. From the opening line, I feel as if this poem contains a whole world. In fact, perhaps three worlds. That of the boy and each of his parents, and their hopes and wonders and dreads and confusions and possibilities and burdens and tenderness and absence and presence, all bumping against one another and in the constant motion of time. And it carries the mystery too, of how each of us is in the world and what passes between us, often unspoken, often not understood. And even in that constant motion, there is stasis too. As you say, they are not walking towards anything. And what is not spoken and not understood is also not resolved. And because it contains so much, this is a poem that for me escapes itself. It doesn't stop at the last line. It just goes on and on. Do you think of it that way?
Wow. I mean, what an incredible unpacking of a poem. I don't know what that was a beautiful summary of that piece. Isn't it what a gift it is to sort of sit inside somebody's response to one poem face to face. I have a beautiful experience in that one of my readers of my work, and I've been very fortunate for the last couple of collections, is the poet Jennifer Convent, whose way of editing when you send a manuscript is to do it via a series of phone calls where Jen is reading you the poem out loud and responding in real times with oohs and ahs and questions and pushing you. It took about 4 or 5 phone calls to do, and it's still one of the greatest things about writing a manuscript is the possibility of doing that with Jen. But I had a similar experience just then with you, just going, oh, how beautiful that you've chosen to go inside this small poem to that degree and give the gift of distilling it down to something that's sort of like, yeah, you captured it so well. I don't know what else to really say to that. I mean, I think it's I think it's probably like a poem like Octonaut of Mine that kind of, goes on beyond the last line and has a life beyond that page and collection. And I absolutely love reading it. It's one of the poems I deeply feel it physically and emotionally when I read it. I can't read that just as this kind of cerebral cognitive experience.
I mean, for me, the gift really is that this podcast series makes me do the work that I might not otherwise do with a person's poetry, and so I have confessed elsewhere that it's a completely selfish exercise on my part to do this podcast series, because it's what I get from it. But I'm hopeful that I'm sharing that with a lot of people. Towards the end of the poem, you write, "This image will let go." But the boy of this poem is an adult now, and the image has found its way into the poem and through the poem into the world. So it really hasn't let go, has it?
Maybe. I suppose that's up to the reader, the boy in the poem and the boy beyond the poem, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I wanted something to sort of softly disengage in the poem. I didn't want it to be like a sever. I didn't want it to be like,
But there's
because
something that's enduring as well.
yeah, I wanted a soft disengagement, but also that something still hangs between, even if there isn't like hands being held. That I feel like, you know, an image can let go, doesn't mean you let go of the image.
I love the expression, their collective sky, at the end of the poem. Can you say something about what you meant by that?
Can, but I'm not going to. I don't know. It's one of those lines. I feel like it. Yeah, isn't it? It's a thing with poetry, right? If we're just going to be didactic and sort of explain everything, to me, it's like the fact that you even want to ask about it, what that means for me personally, then it's done its job.
Yep. You see, that's what happens when you have a podcast. I'm here to ask questions in a way, but no,
Well, you ask great questions, and
I respect that answer absolutely. And you've got one more poem from us this time from Case Notes.
I feel like I've got to be honest. I feel like because that poem takes us into a different space. I feel like we should end on that poem. I feel like
it's a good end,
a boy walks between his parents. You know, yeah, it feels like an end note in a good way. And I like the way it sort of has hit you and what I'm feeling right now. I feel like that's. I think starting with I've been thinking about your birth lately and ending with a boy walks between your parents. We've kind of bookended something.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I think that's important to kind of listen to that. So, plus, I've spent an amazing 2 hours. This is by far the longest I've ever talked about my work, which I don't like to do actually. But yeah, you're very good at creating a considered space with, it takes a deep level of care to really sort of like spend time with each poem and then create an exchange the way you have around it. So I'm appreciative.
It's my pleasure. Did you want to say anything else about your theme generally, or are we?
Not particularly. I think I sort of rambled in different directions with it after sort of sending it through to you at the beginning. And I feel like the poems chosen and the conversation we've had about those poems have really broadened that out and spoken to that, more than enough. I mean, yeah, I think in terms of my work, we've more than sort of gone there.
Well, thank you so much, David.
Thank you, David. David Adès, Poets Corner,
for sharing a little bit of your poetry world with us and your thoughts and insights on the theme. I won't repeat the whole theme, but on that theme. And I hope the book goes great guns.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
When this video is posted, it will include information on how to obtain copies of David's books, so look out for that. Poets Corner will return next up with Tamron Bennett.
Woo! Tamron!
A theme she hasn't told me about yet, so that'll be a surprise. I'll see you then.